All right. Going forward, I just outlined the 4 pillars with the enablers. So the key performance indicators we have for 1, having high performance computing infrastructure, Internet of Things infrastructure, and STEM research. We also have additive manufacturing technology infrastructure and advanced manufacturing technology infrastructure. I'm just trying to run through this to give us a landing before we move ahead to our workshop so that you understand better why we are having series of workshops and webinars to prepare our mindset towards actualizing our vision 10, 10, 10, and 10. So having gone through this, I want to quickly make welcome our president, Mr. Abdul Malik Halilu, the president of Triple Helix Nigeria, to give us a short opening remark to declare this session open. Please, Mr. President, if you're on the call, can you please give us an opening remark? Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Able Victor, moderator. First of all, let me appreciate Professor Richard D. Christ for accepting to be the keynote speaker in this session. For us in Triple Helix Nigeria, we're highly honored that we're having this conversation today. We're all mindful of the fact that research and innovation very, very critical to any economy that seeks to domicile production of goods and services. We're also mindful of the fact that a lot of effort and consistency is needed for you to be able to transition an idea to the markets. There are about 9 technology readiness levels that are required from ideating to prototype development, validation, production, scaling, and then, of course, optimization. All these require sustainable funding. As a developing economy, we are also mindful of the fact that access to finance has been a major limiting factor towards our ability to transition research ideas to the market. So it's a great honor to listen to Professor Richard, who will be doing justice to this topic, giving us the array of opportunities, how we can market ourselves, how we can package ourselves to be able to access funding, the various development phases of research and innovation. So welcome all of you for honoring this invitation, and we look forward to fruitful and exciting deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our president. Once again, everybody, as we move ahead, buckle your shoes and get ready for this grant writing workshop for Triple Helix Nigeria. It promises to be a unique and engaging session. So without wasting much time, we'll be moving in the business of the day. And next on the line is a brief bio of our resource person in the person of Professor Richard D. Gilris. And this will be taken by Professor Eukaria Wichi. This Professor Eukaria, if you're on the call, can you unmute and take up the call? Then after that, you also do us good by introducing the guest speaker, the resource person, to take over from you. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you so much, Dr. Victor, and good afternoon, everyone. This is a bio of a seasoned researcher, Professor Richard De Gris. He is an acclaimed academic and journal editor with more than 25 years of experience in the physical sciences. In 2018, he joined Macquarie University, Sydney, Australia, as Associate Dean, Global Engagement Major. Richard has served as a scientific editor at the Astrophysical Journal between 2006 and 2012, and as deputy editor of the Astrophysical Journal Letters between 2012 and 2018. He is currently an associate editor of the Journal of the Astronomical History and Heritage. Professor Richard has received numerous awards, including the 2012 Selby Award from the Australian Academy of Science, a 2017 Erskine Award from the University of Canterbury, New Zealand, and a 2025 very current visiting fellowship at the State Library of New South Wales, Australia. Professor Richard has had a career-long focus on international collaboration to enhance research, leadership, and community opportunities. A central pillar has been his engagement with the International Astronomical Union, IAU. He was the founding director of the IAU's East Asian Office of the Astronomy for Development between 2012 and 2017, and recently completed a term as president of IAU Division C, which covers education, outreach, and heritage, 2021 to 2024. In mid-2023, Professor Richard accepted an appointment as executive director of the International Space Science Institute, Beijing, China, a 25% secondment. So, ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you Professor Richard de Griges to mount the virtual podium. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much, Yucharia. I'm very happy to get started if you allow me to share my screen. All right. Continue to share, yes. Good afternoon, Director Halilo, Mr. Victor Oloa, Yucharia, and colleagues. Let me sort out my screen so I can actually talk to you properly. It is my, sorry, we should not start at the end, of course. Let me just do that. Sorry. Better go to the start before we start the session. There we go. It is my pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and I thank you for being flexible. I understand that your normal sessions are a bit later in the day, but as I'm based in Sydney, Australia, it is just gone 9:15 in the evening here. So this is still a good time to talk about some interesting aspects of our own development. Yucharia got in touch with me some time ago asking me if I could speak to you about ways in which to obtain major funding, external funding through grants. And as it happened, I had spoken about this in the past for the INAGO Academy and also for INASP, well, its former branch Author Aid, which is now called Rising Scholars. And so I said, well, I'm very happy to do so, and I'll speak to you on grantsmanship, which is what we're doing at this time. So let's get started. So effective strategies to move from idea to impact, how do we go about doing that? So this is what is on the agenda today. In the next 50 minutes or so, I plan to go through a range of slides and introduce to you ways to achieve your goals as a researcher, particularly by obtaining major grant funding. We'll talk about introduction to research funding, types of research funding, types of research funders, how to plan for a research proposal, how to compose a research proposal, and then the whole process that goes into the next steps, which is somewhat of a black box to quite a few researchers. So I hope to lift the lid a little bit. So let's talk about what's research funding. Research funding refers to any funding allocated for research in science, technology, and the social sciences and humanities. It can be funded by governments, private corporations, or charitable foundations, non-governmental foundations. In developed countries, funds allocated for research and development amount to just a small fraction of GDP. I am currently based in Australia, where the fraction is even less than 1%, less than 2%, which causes us some headaches because it's very difficult to obtain major grants at the moment. Some other countries, I worked in China for 8.5 years of my career. It was much easier because there it was much closer to 4 to 5% of gross domestic product, GDP. Governments usually fund basic science and innovative projects with the potential of commercialization. In particular, these days in Western countries, commercialization is a major driver of research funding. Privately funded research is mostly after the profits. And so what that means is that you as a researcher, if you want to do a research project, you have to think from the perspective of the funder. What do they want to get out of you getting their money, because they want something back. And particularly if it's private, they probably want to make money. So you might wonder why good grant writing skills are essential. Well, first of all, as I mentioned, in some countries, the budget for research is limited and it's shrinking. We can see that if you've been following the news for the last few months, we can see that happening in the United States, where research funds are being cut, and funds distributing agencies their budgets are being slashed. There is intense competition to acquire research funding. Everyone is pretty much good enough to compete and to do the research, but to get the grant, the competition is fierce. And there are very small margins between getting funded and not getting funded. So you really have to write a good grant that really convinces the panel that will be looking at it. And most of the time, that panel might not be composed of experts in your area. They might be people from adjacent areas or even from more distant areas. We'll talk about that as we get through this. Gaining external funding can boost your career quite significantly, and I'll give you a personal example. I got my first big grant when I was a senior lecturer in the United Kingdom. I worked at the University of Sheffield for about 7 years. That second career step, senior lecturer, I got this big grant that allowed me to hire a postdoctoral researcher and undertake research for the next 4 or 5 years. That actually got me promotion to the next level up. In the UK, that was reader, so that would be associate professor in many other countries. So that was a boost to my career. And similarly, when I worked in China, I got a few very large grants, which helped propel me to the forefront of my field in the Chinese community as well. Sorry. Research grants offer financial independence. You don't have to rely on your university, your research institution, or even your company. If you get a grant, you have some level of independence to pursue your own research. But it is important to understand how decision makers assess and evaluate your proposals. So it's important to step in their footsteps and consider what they really want to get out of giving that money to you. And so once you've acquired funds, you can boost your credibility and visibility, and also it helps your university and organization, because that's what goes into all those rankings that we hear about. So what types of research funding can we apply for? And that ranges, of course. Research grants are awarded to fund a research project with a predefined purpose. Sometimes when I apply for these projects, I think, well, I have to tell the funder what I want to get out of this. How can this be research if I already know what the outcome is going to be? But that's how things are going these days. Such grants fund can either an individual or an entire team of researchers. Often you're stronger if you work in a team because everyone brings their own expertise. So the sum of the parts is more than the sum of the individuals. Usually the leader of the application, the principal investigator, tends to be a senior member of academic staff with co-investigators and more junior research assistants. Grants can also fund large collaborative projects between researchers, institutions, or even internationally between countries. That doesn't happen too often, but it can happen, particularly in Europe, where they have international grants from the European Research Council. And if you're a junior researcher, many countries offer grants for early career researchers to establish themselves or to at least spend some time in another country to gain the skills that they need to make that next step in their careers. Research grant applicant requires a host organization to provide that backbone, that administrative backbone, that funding backbone, and budget support, so that the grant funding agency knows that they can rely on the whole administrative process to be handled properly. Grants are what they are. You don't have to repay them. It's money awarded to finance activities. Of course, even though you don't have to repay it, you have to report on it, of course, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The money could be either awarded all at once, or more likely, if it's a large grant, in installments, maybe once a year or halfway through the project, a second installment. And as I mentioned before, it is important to understand what the funding bodies want to get out of their funding program. So what are the goals of the funding bodies? Not what are your goals, but what do the funding bodies want to get out of it? Decisions tend to be made not just based on what the researcher plans to do and if it fits in with the funding body's goals, but also if the assessment panel thinks that the researcher and his or her team is good enough to carry out that project, if they have the right expertise and the time for it particularly. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. And so grants can be awarded for a whole variety of things like research, training, travel, conferences, attendance, and all that kind of thing. Ideally, of course, you want a big grant so you can buy your equipment, you can buy your consumables, you can hire a junior researcher or more than one. Travel grants tend to be of smaller amounts. So types of grants. So far, most of what I referred to in the past previous slides was called competitive funding. Proposals are selected based on evaluation by a reviewer or a panel of reviewers. The funding is based on the merits of the application, not on who you know, and we don't know in advance who's going to get the funding. That's the ideal. In most cases, it works like that as well, but sometimes a bit of bias creeps in. If you're a senior researcher that people know quite well, you might have a competitive edge, which is not quite fair, but it happens sometimes. It can also be that, and this happens often within universities, given departments or given researchers within a university get a certain amount of funding depending on their makeup and the number of their staff. So that's called formula funding. So all applicants who meet the minimum eligibility criteria will receive a fraction of the money. Then we can have continuation funding. Some grants allow you to apply for a continuation money once you run towards the end of the project and the project has potential to continue. Sometimes it's open to both new applicants and continuing applicants. And then there's money mostly from the government. If you have a federal government, they might give funding for research to the states, and the states will then pass it on to you as the researcher if you qualify for their grants. So these are the types of grants. Most of what I'll be talking about today will be the competitive funding. So here are other types of research grants. They tend to be somewhat smaller in scope and also in amount of funding. The international fellowships, they tend to allow someone to spend some time, varying from several months to several years overseas in another country to learn new techniques, to gain more knowledge, experience, expertise, and foster innovation between countries. the audience members of this call. One of the funding organizations that comes to mind is, for instance, the TWAS, the Third World Academy of Science, based in Italy. But one can apply for travel grants. These tend to be smaller. They tend to be targeted just to go to a meeting or for a research visit to another institution. Usually travel and accommodation, maybe some food. Then there are institutional research grants given to institutions as seed money. In many countries, universities get a certain amount of money from their governments. Often that's based on how many students they teach, for instance. And so that's formula funding. And then there are grants that you can apply for that resemble the travel grants to allow you to attend conferences, symposia, and seminars, and they cover registration fees. Sometimes, of course, you can ask for a fee waiver. That is in a way also a grant, but you don't get the actual money. Sorry, it's going back. Should not go back. So research grants are usually provided to a team of researchers. It's rare that you get it as an individual because you need to carry out the work, and that requires time. It helps to build the reputation of the institution where the researchers work, and it also enhances the researcher's profile. Research grants are given to create or discover something new theories, new experimental research, or new instruments. You won't get it for doing more of the same, because for that you have to find different funding. For something new, you qualify to get research grants for innovative developments. In social science, research grants can help to carry out studies of large sample sizes. And that's not something I can talk about because I'm a physical scientist. Let's talk about fellowships briefly. And I know that particularly a lot of junior researchers in Africa are very keen to get fellowships, to spend a few years in maybe a European or another Western country to gain experience and learn techniques. These tend to be awarded to individuals on the basis of academic merit, can fund tuition if necessary, and of course living expenses in full or in part. To give you an example, I recently applied for funding with a colleague of mine from India. This allowed an Indian PhD student to spend 6 months at my institution. She got fully funded for her living expenses and her flights to come over to Sydney. And as the result of that, we are now going through the final stages of publishing a joint paper. So that's actually very helpful, that kind of grant, because it can boost your research and your productivity. Usually, however, these fellowships tend to be longer. They tend to be anywhere, well, it says here 1 or more years. I would say I have not seen too many one-year grants. They tend to be 2, 3, or even more years because that is a time period during which you can really make an impact in your research. You might be limited to in applying for fellowships by the amount of time that has lapsed between the end of your last degree and the start of the application deadline or the start of your fellowship. And then some fellowships can also fund engagement with industry or government. A fellowship is helpful. I was lucky enough to be seconded overseas when I was earlier in my career. It's not just good to gain additional knowledge and expertise in your field. It's also good to learn about cultural differences, which are just as important, and to make friends in other institutions in other countries, because you will always see those people again later on in your career, be that virtually or be that in person. And if you've gotten to know someone in person, it's so much easier to work with them because you understand them better, right? So the benefits, of course, from the funder's perspective is that you gain extensive experience through these programs. You attain an opportunity to gain hands-on experience alongside more experienced researchers elsewhere in programs that you don't have access to at your own institution. And they help you to build networks. And that's what I was talking about, making friends and getting to know people you will rely on for the rest of your career. Some fellowship programs provide benefits, including healthcare, housing, or even student loan repayments. They are rare. They're very, very precious, of course. Housing is the one that comes across fairly frequently. Even as a staff member, many institutions prefer their faculty to pursue those fellowship programs because it adds prestige to the institution. And so I've noticed that my institution here in Sydney, that if I talk to my head of school or my dean and I say I'd like to apply for one of these placements overseas, they're very happy to support that, provided it fits within my duties of teaching and leadership. Right, so let's talk about the type of funders that one can apply to. You should not just apply for anything and everything that you come across because you're probably not eligible. So you really need to carefully research what kind of funder funds the type of research that you would be competitive in. So it's important to identify a funder operating in your area of research. For instance, as a matter of fact, many medical researchers apply to funding from the Wellcome Trust in the UK. I wouldn't do that because in the physical sciences, they don't fund anything. So I would go for different programs. Research can be funded with the intention of academic and scientific progress or to lead to a commercial outcome. My university here in Sydney, for instance, provides seed funding of a few $1,000s to teams that want to work on an initial development of a proposal that eventually will lead to a commercial outcome, because that's what Western universities are really keen in these days. Research can be funded by governments, and that's the bulk of the funding usually. Charities, I mentioned the Wellcome Trust already, the Leverhulme Trust is one of them, and the TWAS I talked about as well, or non-governmental organizations, but also by industry. And that's actually a bit something you have to really be careful about. As beginning academics, people often think, oh, I'll just go to industry and ask them to fund me. That's not the way it works, unfortunately. Industry has limited funding, and they, of course, want to make a profit. So they're not just going to give away their money without any return. This is usually a long process. It may take several years before you get funding from an industry partner. Once they have gotten to know you and they've seen what you bring and what the potential of your team is and how they can benefit from including you in their research, at that point you could potentially ask for co-funding from industry. It's not something you start with. If you start with it, industry will switch off, and that's the end of that relationship. So be very careful in approaching industry for funding, because it's not something you get right away. As I mentioned earlier, all funders have priorities, so you have to really carefully read their call for proposals and then the detailed background information to which they want answers from you in your funding application. So you have to think from their perspective when you write your proposal. In terms of government funding, all government funding decisions should comply with policies that benefit society, because that's what governments do on the whole. Research proposals are usually selected by a government agency. Right here in Australia, it's the Australian Research Council, which is a government agency. Government funding opportunities and projects can be affected by shifts in government policies. I only have to point at the United States, where things have been happening very rapidly over the last few weeks, and we see that government funding is really changing massively, not just domestically in the US, but even internationally. And that is, from my perspective, a shame, but this is not something we can do anything about. Research proposals adding value to the general public are usually ranked higher for government funding. Here in Australia, we are asked to write a paragraph or two, up to 250 words, I believe, of the impact our proposals, our proposed research will have on society if we get funded. So that's really the national interest test, they call that, which is sometimes causes headaches, because you really have to think carefully, what does the public get out of the academic proposal that I want to pursue. And then there are often separate funding opportunities for innovative and marketable projects. So that's that commercialization. That's actually getting quite big these days in most Western countries. Regarding charities and non-governmental organizations, you have to think somewhat differently. Their funding comes from people or from maybe a community or a corporate entity. they are not non-profit. They often get the funds from governments, but they're not non-governmental. And they often support a specific cause. I mentioned the Wellcome Trust already, which is associated with medical causes. And so they really they have a limited amount of funding, perhaps even more limited than governments. And so they really want you to tailor your proposal to their specific cause. And not diverge from that, because if you diverge, you don't get the money. You really have to focus on their cause. So that's the final point here. Funding decisions are directed by how well the research proposal integrates with the cause they support. And then in industry, it is a major contributor, but it takes a lot of time to develop a good relationship between academia. Much of the industry funding is, as I said, for commercialization, applied research that industry can do something with and eventually make a profit of. Most industry research is not done in collaboration with academics, but done in-house. And so that's why I said it takes a few years to gain that trust from your industry partner before they are willing to farm out some of their research to your academic center, which might have expertise that they don't have access to, right? So university industry partnerships the type of research depends on really what the two partners want, from testing of previously developed products to performing early stage basic research of a project. But it's all to do with eventually being able to make a profit from that investment in you. So how do we go about planning a research proposal? Well, we first normally we hear about an opportunity from a call for proposals, and there are lots of calls for proposals going around. Some of them are scams, so you have to be very careful about that. But there are, in essence, 3 types of calls. You can have an open call. Usually there is a call once or twice a year by the major funders that allow you to apply for a maximum amount of funding for a period of a few years' time. And you just decide on the topic and you work it out, well, to the benefit of your funder. Then there are the directed calls. Quite a lot of grant opportunities, funding opportunities are out there where the funder says, well, we will fund research in this particular area or with these particular partner countries. So find a partner in that other country and we can consider your application. So that's directed, that's not completely open. And then sometimes, and this happens a lot with industry, but also with some government departments, they want something very specific out of a research project. They might have already identified a possible research team that can perform well and deliver the outcomes, and they will invite you to put a proposal together, and they probably invite you and a few other research teams. So it's still a competition, but you are invited to apply. So that is more limited in scope. Now, all right, so you might be excited to get started on applying, but that starts a long time before you actually write your proposal. As an academic, I am constantly on the lookout for opportunities, not opportunities that I have to apply for in the next few weeks, but opportunities that will come up fairly regularly throughout the year, and maybe I can apply for them in 6 to 8 months' time or next year, right? So that's my longer-term planning as an academic. So finalize which grant or fellowship you wish to apply for sometime in advance, probably a year in advance. If you work with humans or animals, check if you need to have any licenses or ethical approvals. That's on that time scale as well. See if your host university or institution is willing to support your application, and then start talking to collaborators to see if they're interested in forming a team with you. So that you do that 8 months to a year in advance of the opportunity. Of course, not all opportunities are announced that far ahead, but these are the major research grants that come around every year. Now, half a year before the application deadline, download the application form to get an idea of what is required and look at the instructions from the funder if they are available already, just to see what you need. And then you may want to talk to your research administrator at your institution to see how the institution can support your proposal. Here at Macquarie University, where I work in Sydney, we have a fairly large team that supports researchers in applying for funding, and they're very good in helping out, and they know the pitfalls and they know what people often forget, so they really are very good. And sometimes it's a bit annoying when you send your proposal, which is almost ready, send it to them for a check, and they come up with a few things that they want you to change. But in the end, that makes the proposal better. So it's good if you have a research administrator at your institution who can help you not just polish your proposal, but make sure that you address all of the requirements in the call. In many fields, you need some preliminary data before you can apply to get more data to show that there is potential of your research to make a major impact. So you need to understand, you need to see if you can get that preliminary data, maybe using seed funding from your institution or from somewhere else, if you have some capacity to obtain that data. 3 months ahead, which is pretty much the time you should start writing. If you need to fund major equipment, you should get quotes at that time. You need to check the costings for everything, including personnel, overheads and all that, and then start drafting your application. It is always a good idea to ask a knowledgeable colleague to read your proposal. But that's not good enough, because the major proposals, they are usually assessed by an assessment panel, and the assessment panel will usually be composed of scientists who are not experts in your field. They might be in adjacent fields, or they might just simply be scientists who are not even close to your field. So you have to make sure that your proposal is accessible and understandable to pretty much the entire panel. Hold off on using too much jargon, too many abbreviations, too much technical detail that someone in another field than yours doesn't quite understand. Make sure it's exciting enough, but don't go into overly technical details if you don't have to. I think I have a brief video I'd like to play in the next slide. No, not yet, sorry, that's coming up in a few slides, sorry. So most funders also want you to publish your research outputs in papers, in research papers. And these days, most funders mandate that you publish them open access. And that costs money. And so you should apply for funding to publish in open access journals. So that's part of your budget. Some industries, however, do not want you to publish unless they give you permission to do so, because there might be some industry secrets that otherwise would go on the street. And so it is useful to notice, it's essential to notice in advance, so that you don't run foul of your funding partner in terms of the opportunities to publish or not publish. So here's a checklist before you start preparing your proposal. Consider the long-term goals of your organization. So where do you as an organization, where does your organization wants to go eventually, and where do you want to go within your organization, right? My institution has started asking researchers to think of their plans for the next 5 years. We don't have to submit it to anyone, but we are asked to think about where we want to be research-wise in 5 years' time. And once we have that idea, and that's big thinking, that's the big picture of your research, right? And once we have come up with that idea, then we can start thinking, okay, what do we need to do to get there? What is the research fund that I need to apply for? How much personnel do I need? How much money do I need? What is the equipment that I need? So which grant opportunities can I apply for? So that's what we call the top-down approach. Identify your strength, create a plan, not just a proposal of that little research that you really want to do next year, but really in the next few years, and then research which funders might be able to provide money for your plan, to achieve your plan. Make sure that your research and the funders' remit match, and then look for details about the grants that you want to apply for, details of the grants, how to apply, and even members of committees. Do you know them, and what is their expertise? If you write a proposal in your area, will they all understand it, or do you need to be more general? So here are some questions you should ask yourself before starting to write. What are the current trends in your field? What are the current limitations and restrictions? Which subject areas were awarded funding recently? Then the question is, if something was awarded funding recently, will they award it again, or do you have to innovate and do something different? What are the future plans of the funder? They might have actually said something about that in their annual reports. Who are the people assessing and making decisions on your proposals? What is their expertise? What is their background? How do you have to write your proposal so that they find your proposal exciting and understandable? How does the review process work? When is the deadline, of course? How long after the deadline will you know the outcome? That takes forever in this country here in Australia, because we submit in March and we hear back in November, so that's a long time. And what's right, and then what is the success fraction of grant applications? In many countries, it's up to 30%. Here in Australia, we're only at 15%, so it's actually quite difficult to get a major grant. So here are some points to remember. Funding bodies look for good researchers. Why am I saying that? Well, you always have to write a brief biographical statement and add that to your grant application. And so you need to really work on that and make sure that you come across as, you know, a top researcher within your area and to the extent possible by your own research background. So think of funders as potential investors in you and your ideas. And so you really must sell your idea. You have to be enthusiastic and excite them. Make sure that they feel excitement by reading your proposal. Not even the whole proposal. The first paragraph is where you sell your idea. And we'll talk about that in a second. Think about this from the funder's point of view. What do they want to get out of funding you? Talk to your finance office about costings, etc. And then also seek advice on whether or not you can publish. And I think that might go to the next section. So how do we then go about writing a research proposal? Well, as always, do your homework. Research previously successful grant proposals. My institution has a library of successful proposals, which only those of us who have an institutional email address can access. So it's not open to the public, it's only open to researchers within my institution. So identified, and some funders actually have examples of successful proposals on their website. So check that. Identify the most recently funded proposals. Why were they better than proposals involved in that did not get the funding? Read through them. And if you don't have access to them, you can always write to successful applicants and see if they're willing to share some or part of their proposal. And then check for the tone, the structure, the theme, the order of presentation, how they have written their proposal. It's also helpful if there's someone in your institution or a local institution to talk to someone who recently won an award, because they will understand the needs and they will know the process and can provide you with insights as to how to proceed to become successful yourself. And so here are some questions you could ask. Did you call or visit the sponsor before writing the proposal? That's the funding organization. How did you approach it? And how close was the awarded amount to your proposed budget? That is a good question, because quite often you might apply for, let's say, $1 million, and you might only get 600,000 if you're successful, for instance. So in many cases, the funder will cut your budget. Then you have to consider, if they cut my budget, is my research proposal still viable? Can I still do the research I wanted to do with a smaller budget? And that is quite an important consideration, of course. If you know of people who have served on these assessment panels, it would also be helpful to get their insights. So get in touch with past reviewers and just ask them questions. How many proposals do they usually get on their desk, and how much time do they have to read through each of them? And you'll be surprised. In many cases, they might have 10 minutes per proposal at most. If your proposal consists of 20 pages, they're not going to read all 20 pages in great detail. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because that means that you really have to focus on those first few paragraphs. That's where you have to gain their interest and their excitement, right? Those first few paragraphs are the most important. And that's also to say that some people work until the very last minute before the deadline to polish that final little word or sentence or comma or whatever. Really, it doesn't matter that much, right? Because the assessors only have maybe up to 10 minutes to look at your proposal. They're not going to fall over that missing comma or that extra question mark, right? So I think it's not worth that extra time to keep polishing until just before the deadline. Make sure it's good enough and that's exciting, and then just let it go and submit it well in advance of the deadline. And then some questions you can ask: what are the quality criteria? What are the most common errors encountered? And do they use a scoring system? To give you an example, as it was said in the introduction, I am a part-time director of an institution in Beijing. We fund meetings, in essence. We put scientists together from different countries to make them do the most excellent science that they can do, and we provide a lot of the funding for that. And we do this jointly with our colleagues in Switzerland. I'm actually off to Switzerland this weekend for a science committee meeting where we just go through this whole process I've just been talking about. Last year, I was very disappointed by the number and the quality of proposals sent for funding to my institution in Beijing compared to the proposals sent to the institution in Switzerland. And so I made some changes to the program on our side, and we now provide information scoring system and about the quality criteria that people have to address in order to be successful. I haven't seen the actual proposals this year because as a director, I'm not on the panel, but at least we had twice as many proposals this year as last year. So I hope that this has been the right approach. If you have any additional questions, you can always contact the office of the funder and ask them questions such as the ones indicated on the right. How are proposals being evaluated? Is there anything that's often ignored or missed? And what outcomes do you expect from grantees? A few more. So here are the key features of a good grant proposal. We have 4 components: project impact, project description, project participants, and project budget. So you can see on the right what that means. Impact, complete description of how progress will be assessed and what indicators will determine the impact. So that's about evaluation. How will you evaluate that you are on track? Provide an overview of how project impact may continue beyond the life of the grant. Funders don't want this to be a one-off. They want to give you funding to start something that leads to more. So how, and without their direct funding, so how will you do that? The description should include clearly defined and realistic goals and explicitly state the objectives, the specific activities, the details, and the timelines. And the participants should also be clear about what the target population is, who will benefit, but also who you as a team are. And then the costs need to be complete so that it's fully justified what you're going to fund and spend their money on. Oh, sorry, and now is the video I wanted to share with you. All right, so that gave you some insights how how you should go about grabbing the attention of your reviewers. Right, now most proposals require what's called a needs statement, a brief, concise, and coherent statement supported by evidence that explains why the project needs to be undertaken. That's pretty much your abstract, but it's also something that comes very early on in the project brief, in the proposal itself. Sorry, I'm just clicking this away. It should clearly identify a gap or a problem within a specific community. So what is the gap in the research that you are addressing, and is it significant, and will it really have an impact on the community? It should provide the funder with a reason to care and know that the issue is significant and requires a solution. That's that emotion that the video was talking about, right? And so this establishes the focus and the rationale for the grant proposal. So what makes a successful team? We briefly talked about putting a team together already. Ideally, we share our expertise, and together our expertise is better than the sum of the parts. So every member has a team that contributes to the bigger picture. Hopefully, at least some of those members have worked together in the past, and successfully so. They share their research vision, and their working style is such that they can actually collaborate. And that is actually important because I have been part of teams where the working styles clashed and then it doesn't work, right? So it's good to have a team that, at least part of the team, that has worked in the past together, and of which the members trust each other, so that at least progress is guaranteed. So build a team that is experienced and has relevant expertise. The sum is more than the sum of the parts. That values working together, that knows how to create a well-planned proposal, has the capability to anticipate potential risks and find solutions. That's experience, of course, and is skilled in offering benefits to society and innovative ideas. So those are characteristics. Now, I've got a few slides that go through writing the proposal. I'm actually running a bit, looking at time. There's still some time, of course. There's a difference between aims and objectives. The aim is the big picture, and the objective is what you will do, right? The aims is the bigger than your proposal. The research question states the desire to investigate, and the practicalities of the research depends on the objective, on the objectives, and it should highlight the methods you will be using. Many projects require preliminary data. The stronger the data, the better. My wife is a biologist, and I constantly hear her talk about, we have to get more data before we can write a good grant proposal. And that's important. So where do you get that from? You have to be resourceful to get some data before you get the big funding to get more of your data. But the data that you get should demonstrate that if you get more of that data, you will be able to carry out your project successfully, and it will have a major impact on the field and on maybe on society. And number 2 says there is no checklist of how much preliminary research is adequate. It's just, is it good enough to go to the next step? That is it's a judgment call that assessors make, but that senior researchers have to make themselves before applying. If you have more ambitious projects or more risky projects, you probably need more data to support your proposal. And if you work on multidisciplinary projects, you need to have some data from all different disciplines. So here is the way that you write a proposal. You funnel it. You start by saying, well, the context is the big picture. There is some background. That background in the literature has led to some questions, a gap in the literature. Of those questions, we have a hypothesis as to why there is this gap or why something is happening. And our goal is to figure out if that hypothesis is correct. So it's a funnel. You go from big to small, right? That's the first step of putting together your ideas for a proposal. In the methods section, you should highlight what the researcher intends to do and in which order, and what will be the key findings of the study. Methods is probably easiest to write because that's fairly standard, or unless you have developed a new method, of course. It should be written separately for each goal, and at the end it should be put together. And it is important to mention the context of the proposal so the funder understands the background. So here are a few items that you should think about when you plan your project. A good project allows monitoring and evaluation, and if there are any issues, they should be able to be resolved. So evaluation is just as important as planning, because by monitoring and evaluating your progress, you know whether or not you're going to reach your goals. The research proposal should clarify the roles and responsibilities of each member. The timeline should be realistic across the entire duration. And so one way of doing that is by having a Gantt chart. Now, a Gantt chart you may not have heard of. At the bottom is an example where visually or graphically you go through the whole process of the proposal. On the next slide, I have copied and pasted a Gantt chart from a proposal I submitted about a year or two ago, just to show you that worked. You don't need to understand the details here, but I had 3 aims, questions 1, 2, and 3 on the very left. The next column says these are the tasks that that support each of the aims. And on the right, you see when during the next 3 years I plan to work on those individual tasks. This is called a Gantt chart, and it shows in one view immediately. A budget is important. I think I don't have to dwell on this too long, but you need to make sure that everything is included. That's the direct costs for everything that you need for the project. That's the personnel expenses. That's for your students, your postdocs, your lab technicians, anyone who needs a salary. And that is the overhead expenses. So that's the money that your institution requires to make sure that the lights are on in your lab, and that the electricity keeps running, etc., and that the building is maintained. That's overhead. Now, you may have heard in the United States, again, in the last few weeks, the administration suddenly decided to reduce the overhead fraction that people can apply for to 15%. And it used to be 50%. So that's a massive cut suddenly, because that will eat into the resources of the institutions to keep their institutions running. I will skip this budget table. And then at the end, it is just as important to write a good biographical statement that is specific to the project, and it should highlight your project management skills and your experience, as well as your budget, sticking to budget. Ideally, of course, you should also include a publication record. Right. And then sometimes you should include a cover letter, but it's not that important. Now, final section, I wanted to talk about the peer review process. It's just like submitting a paper. You submit your application to the funding agency. Initially, the secretarial, the administrative staff look at your proposal to see if it meets all their technical criteria for eligibility. It then undergoes peer review. That peer review can be sometimes done by external reviewers who provide feedback to a panel, and sometimes it's done by the panel members. If you're lucky, you get feedback, and you have the opportunity to respond to the feedback before it goes to the panel. And then the panel gets together and makes a final decision. And if you don't get your grant funded, it doesn't necessarily mean that your grant was bad, but there is always a lot of pressure on a small amount of funding that's available, and there are many good proposals. So it's sometimes just a lottery. The best proposals are often easy to pick out. The proposals that are really not so good are easy to pick out, but the vast majority of proposals are right in that middle bit. And to get funded or not funded, sometimes it's just pretty random. So how do you deal with peer review? You can have 3 different types of criticism. You can have aggressive criticism, which is tough to take, and which you shouldn't really get, but that depends on the peer reviewer. You can constructive it helps you in the issues that might be outstanding. And then very difficult, you get faint praise. That's in essence praise that is critical, which it's very difficult to respond to because there's nothing really to respond to there. So acceptance criteria, have you addressed the objectives of the project? What will be the outcome? Is the problem well formulated? Is it a new problem or is it just routine? Is it an important problem? Is special funding necessary to solve it quickly? Do the proposers have a good idea? Is it explained clearly? Do they know their field? Do they know the background and the literature? Do they have a good track record? And does their work have implications for policy and practice? If you can answer these things in a positive manner, you stand a good chance of ending up high on the pile of proposals of that particular round you're applying for. In addition, if you have existing funding, you may be favored because you have a good track record. Or if you're a new researcher, some grants, provide funding for new researchers to establish yourself. Usually funders would like to spread the love, so they go to different areas and not all in the same area. And if there's industrial interest in your proposal, that is particularly good in some cases as well. Now, things you shouldn't do. Don't present poorly or incomprehensibly. Don't try to do too much. Don't ask for too much funding. I serve on a panel of the Office of Astronomy for Development. We had 100,000 euros to disperse last year, and we had an application there that was asking for 125,000 euros. That was more than our total budget. So obviously that proposal didn't get what they're asking for. It was too expensive. If there is no evidence that the proposals will succeed, you don't stand much of a chance. You should provide some technical details, but not the nitty-gritty, because then some of the assessors will not be able to understand it. You should show that you know your field, and so if you lack references to the key papers in your field, that's not good. If the research has already been done, you won't get funded. If the questions are poorly formed and not worth addressing, you won't get funded. And if it's a routine application, that's also not fundable. I was going to show you another video now. So let's see. Right. So we're almost there. We know what we shouldn't do. And so hopefully we can avoid that in the future. Nevertheless, as I said, there are often a lot of good proposals, but not enough funding to fund everyone. So as you can see, generally 25 to 30% is a good success rate in applying for funding. That means that you get rejected between between 70 and 75% of the time. Most of your proposals will be rejected. Not because you're a poor researcher, but because the funding is so tight, right? It's just a matter of luck sometimes. So don't feel discouraged. If you get rejected, if you try to get feedback, try to understand why you didn't make it. Because if you get feedback and you act on the feedback next time, you have a better proposal next time. Try again. So use the comments and to improve the proposal. Sometimes you just need a little bit of luck. And so after more practice, your proposals will be better, and hopefully next time you get that funding. Right, suppose now you get your funding. What next? Now, some grants provide all funding money in one go, and others come in installments, depending on how long the grants run for. Very often you have to write at least a final report, but sometimes also annual reports, just to make sure to the funder that you're doing what they are asking for. And if there are some snafus, things that didn't go well, you should explain them and how you dealt with them as well. And that's normally perfectly okay. Some grants allow you to apply for additional funding, and others would like you to also be involved in reaching out to your community. I'm going to skip this. So reports of grants, what should go in a report? Should be 5 components: a financial overview of how the money was spent and what's left over, how the program was implemented. As you can see here, goals for the project during the reporting period and progress in relation to the goals. What are the outcomes? How well did you meet your objectives? If there were any, describe them and tell what you did to change and why, and if it has any impact on your budget. And then, of course, summarize the challenges, successes, and lessons. So that's where we are. I hope this was helpful. There was a lot of information. I realized that. I'm happy to provide the slides, or you will get the recording of this webinar. There are a lot of obstacles on the way between now thinking of a project and applying for the project and getting the funding, but it's in the end worth the effort. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm more than happy to answer some questions.
Thank you very much, Prof. That was a wonderful section from you.
Thank you.
And we are glad to be part of this workshop section. So without wasting much time, we'll go to the question and answer session. Maybe you have some questions that you would like Prof to address as quickly as possible. Please do well. Either you put it on the chat button, or you can go ahead and raise up your hand to ask. Just very briefly. We're already running short of time.
I see one question in the chat. Can you share practical tips on budgeting and financial justification, especially for project with commercialization or policy impact goals? Any budgeting, any budget item requires full justification. And so that it depends on the type of grant you're writing, but whatever you put in your budget needs to be justified. Very simplest grant you can apply for is probably a travel grant. So I actually looked at one of these applications yesterday. One of my master's students wants to travel to go to a workshop in Melbourne, which is an hour-and-a-half flight from here. Melbourne is an expensive city, and he said, "Oh, 2 nights. I need to spend 2 nights in Melbourne. That's going to cost me $500 Australian dollars." But I know, as the supervisor, that our tax office here doesn't allow you to apply for more than $173 per night in Melbourne. So I sent it back to him and said, "You can't do this. You're not meeting the eligibility requirements. You have to adjust it." So it has to be properly justified what you want to spend your money on. The same applies for equipment. If you need to apply for equipment or purchase equipment, very often institutions require 3 quotes from 3 different vendors. And you do not necessarily have to go for the cheapest quote, but you have to go for the quote that best meets your requirements, right? But if you don't go for the cheapest quote, you have to justify why not, right? So things like that. You just have to be here for the Australian Research Council, they've gone a little bit too far, in my opinion, because if I put my budget together and I want a PhD student, for instance, and a postdoctoral researcher, that's all fine, but then I want to send them to conferences, and I have to tell the Research Council at the time of application already exactly how much I'm going to pay for flights, exactly how much I'm going to pay for hotels. And this is 3 to 4 years in the future. That doesn't make any sense. But they require that because they need to have justification that they can find back and say to the minister in the end, who is responsible for dispersing that funding, look, the researcher has done their due diligence, they looked at how much things cost, and this is the cost today. Now, and then, of course, as I mentioned during the webinar, it happens very often that the funding agency may like your proposal, but they don't have enough funds left to fund the entire proposal, so you get cut down. And then you have to you probably get notified by the funder, and they might ask you, if you are still okay to continue with your research even with this reduced amount of funding. So you need to really carefully think about the cost. It's not an afterthought. It's an integral part of your proposal.
I think that tomorrow is just resting.
There's a couple more questions in here, and I see a hand. Maybe we should start with the hand.
Okay. All right, Professor Nkalio Hudson, can you go ahead?
Yes, good afternoon. I am Carlo Hudson, Director of Advancement and Linkages at Rivers State University. I just want to say that Professor Richard has done a very refreshing presentation. And I wish he's going to be generous to also share these soft copies with us. That's just what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm
Right.
happy to make a PDF of the presentation. I'll send it to you, Acharya.
Okay, thank you so much.
There's a couple of questions here. Can a grant be awarded to an individual only? And if yes, what is the probability when compared to a team? Grants to individuals tend to be fellowships, research fellowships, and travel grants. If you want to do a proper research project, it is unlikely that an individual will get the grant. You can be a senior researcher applying on your own without a team, but then you most likely apply for funding to hire someone, be that a student, master's student, PhD student, or a postdoc. So applying on your own is usually not as successful as a team, because the team often has expertise that, as I said, combine together and form more than the sum of the individual parts. Here's another question. Does an early career researcher with a low research profile stand a chance in winning a research fellowship or grant? And how can you boost profile? Unfortunately, in many countries, the culture is publish or perish. And so publishing papers, continue to publish papers, that tends to show what your potential is, so your track record. It's papers, it's patents, it's anything, any output, awards, anything that makes you look good. So it's not just papers, but it's anything that makes you look good. We say that to our PhD applicants, for instance, if they have good grades, that's fine, but it's better if they also have some output and some awards and all that. So anything that makes you look good to show that you have a track record and that the funder can trust that the funding they give to you goes to a good end and leads to a productive outcome. That's what I would go for. As a junior researcher, and if you want to apply for research funding, I highly recommend that you work with a team, including more senior people who have that track record. So that you stand a better chance. Okay. How important are partnerships and collaborative networks in successful grant application? And how can one structure them? So that is a good question. As I said, it is usually important to have that collaboration, because you bring different expertise to the table. If you don't have a track record in working with other people and you put them all together, your chances of getting funding are unfortunately not very high. And so it's always my recommendation that you start working with potential collaborators at a fairly low level, but maybe get 1 or 2 papers out. Doesn't have to be in the very top journals, but in decent journals. And once you've got those papers out, you can show that you have worked together successfully, and that the next step is that bigger grant that you applied for. So it's a process. It's not something that goes from day 1 on to day 2. It often takes a long time to plan these things and make sure that you have the track record to allow you to undertake that research. Inflation and fluctuations in exchange rate. Well, the question is, how do you handle that? You just have to deal with it. You have a certain budget. You won't get more budget from your funder. If inflation is significant or the exchange rate is turning negative for you, that means you have less funding. And so that's something you need to have in the back of your mind. If suddenly the amount of funding is reduced compared to what you were planning to do, can you still reach successful outcomes of your research project? You won't get more money. It's just something that you may need to compartmentalize the amount of spending and plan it over a period of time rather than spend everything in one go. Does an early career researcher not attached to an institution stand a chance of winning a research fellowship or grant? The answer is probably no, because funders want there to be a credible institution supporting the applicant, because not because I don't trust the applicant, but they want there to be a proper process to deal with policies, for instance, ethical clearance, and also with budgeting. So that most funders want there to be an institution supporting you. You can't really apply without institutional support. Yeah, I think that those are all the questions that I was asked to address.
Okay. That is a nice one, Prof. Thank you very much for this session. At least we've been able to know that funding bodies look for good researchers, and you think of them as potential investors in you and in your ideas. You also said you must sell your idea, be enthusiastic about work. So on this note, we'll say thank you very much, Prof, for this unique session. It's a very engaging one. It's a very enthusiastic one. Well, thank you for being part of us and for sharing with us from your wealth of knowledge. Thank you and remain richly blessed. To all our audience, everybody that has participated in this very session, in appreciation to Prof, I want you to use your best, your lovely emojis to show how you feel by being part of this very workshop. So just show your appreciation. Everybody we cannot start speaking or showing our appreciation, but with your lovely emoji, quickly do that as we continue. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. We are happy to be part of this very session. So let's use our lovely emoji to appreciate Prof at this moment.
Thank you very much.
So while we do that, we'll be calling on Professor Taufik to give us a closing remark.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Let's see. I tried to put on my video. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see you.
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as we bring today's webinar to a close, let's take a moment to revisit the invaluable guidance shared by our keynote speaker, Professor Richard de Vries, and to see how it all connects back to the core values of Triple Helix model. Professor de Vries began by mapping out the diverse types of funding available, from competitive government grants and philanthropic awards to industry-sponsored partnership and venture capital. He emphasized that understanding each funder's priorities is the first step towards success, because funding isn't just about resources, it's about shared goals. Next, he walked us through the best practices for crafting proposals that resonate, align your, the narrative with the founder's mission by clearly demonstrating how such research advances the strategic objective. Structure your submission with concise aim, rigorous methodology, and measurable outcomes, ensuring transparency and accountability. Engage stakeholders early. He emphasized that stakeholders by inviting feedback from industry, partnership, policymakers, community representatives to refine both your vision and that your budget. He really talked about that a lot in terms of leveraging your institutional capabilities in terms of looking at the proposals properly. Finally, Professor De Gries challenged us to make our research genuinely relevant to funders by translating our theoretical insight into practical solution, whether looking at the prototype, the market adoption policies in terms of what government is implementing. He emphasized that a lot, looking at the atmosphere in all the different parts of the world. He talked a lot about his own country, Australia, as well as what's happening in the States and the impact on the society. So all these strategies reflect the spirit of the triple helix itself, which is academia creativity, which fuels generation of innovation and novel ideas, industry pragmatism that drives commercialization and real-world development, government stewardship, which provides the regulatory framework and public investment that sustain innovation ecosystem. So by weaving this together in the tree, much like Professor De Gries illustrated Chris' funding roadmap, we create a dynamic ecosystem where ideas don't just remain in the lab, but evolve into tangible benefits to society. So now is our turn. Identify one project in your portfolio, revisit its funding narrative, and ask yourself, have I fully engaged the academic rigor, industry relevance, and regulatory insight that the triple helix demand? If not, start a conversation with your collaborators today. He talked a lot about collaboration. And in fact, through that, you can also enhance your career as well, which he also gave examples of how he was able to get his promotions through collaborations and funding. So we'd like to thank you, Professor Richard De Gries, for these expert insights, to our organizations and sponsors for making this event possible, and to all of you for your thoughtful questions and participation. We look forward to seeing how you put these strategies into action, and we can't wait to celebrate your successes as you move from idea to impact. Have a great day, and here's to your next breakthrough, and wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Taufik. Thank you very much, Professor De Gries. We are coming to the end of this very section. And before we go, I just want to remind us of what is coming up on June 26th, 2025. That is our 10th webinar series within Harnessing Digital Innovation Infrastructure for Knowledge-Driven Economy. We'll see same day. But before then, our monthly meeting will be coming up last Wednesday of this month. So thank you. As we draw the curtain close, we say remain engaging, remain insightful, and move ahead with your grant writing with the key takeaways from this workshop. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this very section, and we look forward to more engaging sessions coming forward. Thank you, and bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.